Well, good morning. And if you look at the background, you can see that I am domestically broadcasting this morning from the edge of Lewes, just on the road that enters the dual carriageway and takes you off down to Brighton, or if you want to turn around and go the other way to Hastings, Eastbourne and Hastings. And that's for domestic issues, which we hadn't seen. I must say that it is a week of surprises, and we have managed to overcome them mostly. The technical issues that were driving me mad yesterday have been looked at by a fine team of young technical people, Tony and Nick, and watching them operate is marvelous because they actually say to me, "This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing." And I haven't a clue, but it all turns out okay, and it starts to work again. But the domestic scene is something that uh, we can't legislate for. And here I am, looking at my trees and looking at the sky, and sitting in my comfortable little apartment and broadcasting to you. I think that just once in a while it's not a bad idea. We are having co-hosts. We started off with Stuart last week, and the unfortunate thing is that Tony, sorry, not Tony, Andrew Sloan, our grizzly barber, his grizzlies on Market Street, a very fine barber he is. I think there must be a song there. So, Andrew was a very fine barber, and a very fine barber he is. But he's also just a charming character and full of fun and interesting thoughts. Sometimes he gets quite feisty, and he was due to be on yesterday, and we couldn't make the link. Those links are back in place. Every Tuesday, you'll have with me Marcus Fergus Woods, who is a wine expert. He won't necessarily talk about wine, but what we're doing is we're inviting a number of people from the community to sit in with us and look at what's happening in the news and have their say, because you've got used to hearing me rant, and some of you will accost me in the street and say, "You idiot, how dare you take that opinion, or why did you take that opinion?" But at least we're stirring debate, and having somebody else with perhaps a different viewpoint, a different background, and certainly a different profession to journalism may just spice this whole hour up. We also got other things in line for you in this hour. The first one will be a little mini series of 5 minute items, trying to explain the background to why bonfire is so important. And hopefully we'll have one or two experts who can help us along the way, particularly history experts, because it is historical. It goes back to Bloody Mary, Queen Mary I, and the very first English queen that we ever had. Stress the English, because the kings and queens of England have not necessarily been the kings and queens of Scotland. And that's why there are different numbers behind their names often when it comes to north of the border, and for that matter over the Welsh border as well. So hopefully we can, these are questions that were posed on bonfire night, and we had a very, very satisfactory bonfire night. It was the first time that we launched anything. There were just three of us, a bit of sticky tape, but we did it, and we managed to keep close tabs on the events, looking up School Hill to the War Memorial, and down School Hill to the precinct. And one way or another, with Nick and his famous phone going off down to a bonfire site, the Commercial Square bonfire site, we were able to give you an insight into the sort of fireworks and so on. Well, over 1,000 people joined us for either short periods or long periods, and we had a stream of gratitude from people overseas, some who had been in Lewes and missed this particular occasion, and some who had never seen it before and were absolutely, to use the phrase, gobsmacked. So we performed a service, and we're happy to say that our sister organisations, perhaps that's a bit too strong, other organisations in Lewes did their job too. And as a consequence, there was probably more coverage, more live coverage of this year's bonfire than there has ever been. And we're grateful, and we were able to join forces, or at least not fight with amongst one another, to make sure that the world knew what was going on and why it was going on. And sometimes that's the most important thing, is why. Often in this day and age where anything you do is criticized, it's good to have an explanation, to say this is why we do something. And one of the things that makes bonfire so important here is the burning of the martyrs, the 17 martyrs under Queen Mary. And that really triggered, as they say, when she died, there were the letting off of rousers, which is a banger to you and I, and the sounding of church bells. Well, I don't know that we sound church bells on bonfire night, but we certainly let off rousers in profusion. So it was a fascinating night, a scintillating night, and a night not to forget. Okay. Let's just to see what the day is going to bring. It'd be about 14 to 15 degrees, which is just a little. It said initially it was going to be chillier today, but that's about 2 degrees above yesterday, and certainly Sunday was a chilly day indeed. So it's a relatively warm day today. There's not much chance of rain, but if it is going to come, it's going to come just about now at 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. I see that it does seem to have rained overnight. There are some drops on my balcony railings. A gentle breeze. My famous trees are as still as any. Well, that's not quite true. The tree right outside my balcony is absolutely still. But there is a wonderful cedar tree. Now, I thought it was the wind that was rocking it, but it's not. I don't think. I think it's the fact that there are a couple of pigeons that were on it and have flown off. Such can weather forecasts be fooled. But there's going to be a gentle breeze and scattered cloud. And right now, that's reflecting the exactly what it is. There is some blue sky. There is some white cloud. It's moving, not at a great rate of knots. But it has a pleasant morning about it, and it looks as if that's going to be the tone of the day. Tomorrow is looking very similar, except that the forecast is for thicker cloud and more or less blue sky. That's not bad, really, because the cloud cover does keep the heat in and it makes it slightly warmer. So that's the day that we're looking at. It is now 10 minutes past 8 o'clock for those people who need a time check. And this morning, not in the newspaper headlines, because it's only happened just literally a half hour or so ago, that the government has announced that health workers from the spring will be required to have COVID shots, jabs, if they wish to work in the health service. And the government says Dominic Raab was doing the rounds of the television studios in London this morning and the radio stations to appear and explain his point of view. God, it must be awful going to half a dozen of these places and being asked the same questions. That's why it's always good to try and think of a question that he hasn't been asked before. But he's been explaining that the government have looked at all the research. That's not held them in good stead before. And that they believe that to protect vulnerable people, to protect patients, to protect those who went into hospital, and apparently the number is quite high, who went into hospital for some other reason, and then actually were found to have COVID because they were in hospital and died from it, was extraordinarily high. So I suppose the government doesn't want to get caught again, but also let's be kind and generous and think that they have the welfare of their constituents at heart. Not that much that they've done recently seems to indicate that, but nonetheless, let's give them good grace, and that they have now legislated that health workers, frontline health workers anyway, must have the jab. it's a controversial decision because there are many people that believe that the freedom to not have the jab is essential to our democratic way of life. I understand that argument, that perhaps in this particular case, one of the things about any argument is there are always exceptions to the rule. The English language itself is so full of exceptions, it's almost impossible to find the rule. And that is true of many constitutions, written constitutions throughout the world. And once they're written, people find that they have to have an exception. We, on the other hand, in this country, do not have a written constitution. It's based to some extent on legislation, on precedent, and on court rulings. And that has worked very well for us. So we don't say exceptions. What we do is we either add to or we change as we see fit, depending upon circumstance. Anyway, the government has decreed that health workers should have the jab as of next spring. So if you work for the health, or you feel sorry or sympathetic to the health workers who don't want the jab, the decision doesn't have to be made for a few months yet. Let's look at the headlines. I think it's it's the Times. Little things pop into my inbox as I'm doing these things, and that was that a news agency in Kosovo, run by a former student and also a friend of mine, is broadcasting, and they seem to broadcast at about the same time as we do, except there's an hour's difference in time, of course. So it pops up that they've just gone live. So somewhere around 8 o'clock each day, they go live just as we're going live. So that's an interesting thing for us to know, that Kosovo has got its news operations operating, if you like, not confined by domineering and authoritarian rule. They've still got a long way to go in terms of getting their governance right in Kosovo, as is true of much of the Balkans. But nonetheless, it's always a step in the right direction when you know that the media isn't being censored or censured, and that journalists are not going to prison, which they did prior to the war of 1999. Now let's back to the Times. Anger as the PM skips Sleaze showdown in the Commons. What Boris did was he decided to go north and spread the good word of what the Conservatives are doing, because that was a stronghold that he picked up at the last election, and they are loath to let it go because it could mean the difference between governing and not governing. So he hopped north, but this was when there was debate about the Sleaze issue of scrapping the rules, as many newspapers have said, and allowing an MP who had been found guilty of using his influence to get various people work or companies work, and had received over $500,000 for their efforts. And Boris put a 3-line whip on and managed to get that overturned. And then the MP stepped down and left Boris looking a bit silly. And of course, the mere fact that influence had been used to protect one of their own was a great uproar throughout the country, but also a great uproar within his own party. And a prime minister always has to be very careful. It's all very well to say he's got a huge majority in the Commons, but if enough people turn on him and force a leadership contest, then it doesn't matter about the majority, because it will be somebody else's majority, not his. But anyway, when it was debated yesterday and everybody could have a go and say, you naughty, naughty man, he skipped it. He went north, and the Times says that everybody's pretty angry. And the Metro, the London paper, carries on with that theme, is I'm a prime minister, get me out of here. Beam me up, Scotty. I'm not going to face the flak. But once again, there is a lot of anger that he did that. And a suggestion that when it got really messy, that he wasn't prepared to stand up and be counted. And I have to say that, what's your view? Do you think that this is the case? I mean, it is. Mickey's on this morning. Let's see what Mickey has to say. Mickey is on with some important information at the moment. No trains will be stopping at Rye train station from 3 p.m. on the 13th. The 13th is Rye bonfire. No trains stopping from 3 p.m. and normal service will resume on Sunday morning. Well, there you are. If you're thinking of going to Rye for any other reason than bonfire, or if you're thinking of going for bonfire, you can't get off at Rye after 3 o'clock on the 13th, which is what, this Saturday, I suppose, is it? Yeah. Yeah, be about that. So thanks, Mickey, for that. Mickey is a faithful viewer. He doesn't always agree. In fact, he very often doesn't agree with me, which is great, because that's what debate is all about. That's what we should be doing in our community, is thrashing things around. Okay, so the Prime Minister, get me out of here. Is he a coward? Is he ducking the responsibility? Or is he being a sensible leader and saying, I say, hell with it, I've got bigger and better things to do than to listen to a rowdy mob in the Commons call me names because I tried to defend one of my own. I'm not taking it lightly. In fact, I have been in charge of an anti-corruption campaign with media in Romania, which is probably undoubtedly one of the, or was most of the corrupt nations anywhere in the, once you join the EU free world. So I know a little bit about it, and and I do understand that corruption can be not terribly evident. Sometimes, for instance, in Romania, one of the things that the people who are pointing the finger at the government and saying they were corrupt then admitted that they actually paid to get their driving license. I'm not a bit surprised that driving in Bucharest is just it's just absolutely outstanding. Is pigs in trough springs to mind, particularly at the traffic lights where it says don't proceed beyond this if you can't clear, you see the things here. Nobody pays any attention at all. It just jams up the entire town, the entire city. Right. Right. Okay. He said he hopes that we can share the message about Rye better than he can. Indeed, Mickey, we are, and we will remind people as we go along that no train stopping at Rye on the I think from 3 p.m. on the 13th, which is a Rye bonfire night, and no more trains after 3 o'clock stopping there until the Sunday morning. So you have been warned and you have been alerted, and thanks, Mickey, for that. Daily Express, which normally is supportive of the government's position. Just say sorry for the mess, Prime Minister. Just say sorry for the mess. And it is a mess. So the Express, I mean, if the Express is in trouble, saying nice things about the government, then it is a pretty serious situation because it bends over backwards to support Boris Johnson. So what I'm saying is, say sorry, which he's refused to do at the moment. And basically, they're using double speak, which politicians really do. Is, well, the minister who led the debate sort of said that it shouldn't have happened or whatever. But the Express realizes the seriousness, perhaps, which Boris hasn't so far, and that is say you're sorry because everybody is so much up in arms. Is your premiership is at risk? Does Boris care? I mean, Stuart Dolby, our energy correspondent, who appears each Wednesday with me, knows the Johnsons, and he says actually, is now that he's been Prime Minister, much like David Cameron, that's all they wanted to be was Prime Minister. Once they're there, they really don't care. They've been there, done that, and they move on. The fact of the matter is that Boris Johnson, when he became Prime Minister, was faced with more troubles than he thought he could ever having any one short life. He had to meet COVID. He had to meet huge amounts of payments from the Treasury. He had to meet a diminishing democracy. He had to meet Brexit. He had to meet trade wars, unrest in Northern Ireland. I mean, it was an awful lot. So if he just wanted to be prime minister and sit and put his feet on the front of the fire and toast muffins, he had another thing coming. So the Guardian, Johnson is leading the Tory party through the sewers, says Starmer. Well, Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, who has his own problems, got into the fray, as one would expect. And there is a good phrase that Boris is leading the Conservative Party through the sewer. In other words, they're up to no good. They're doing naughty things, which, when they become patent and when they become obvious, are the sort of things that can turn us, the average punter, away from a party. Never mind its policies, but if they are that sort of group of people, and I've had a go this morning at a local group, so on Facebook. I understand that the people power can work sometimes. And in this particular instance, the newspapers, who, much as people say, oh, it's all the fault of the media and so on and so forth, which is absolute rubbish, of course. Try living in a country without free media. That when the media is really getting upset about some of the government actions, and particularly Boris's, then it is time for a proper debate amongst the public, amongst us, to take place. And hopefully we on this program can stir a little bit of that. I know we don't have too many followers at this hour of the morning, but throughout the day, this program does pick up quite a number of viewers, and I would urge those viewers to think about entering into this particular debate. Because if we want straight and narrow government, if we want people who aren't corrupt, haven't got their hands in the pockets, who care about their society, the only way is for the general public to get upset and say that they're upset. The big problem with our society is that at the moment, we've got too many people who are fat and sassy, and they were kept that way by the government with furlough and lockdown payments and so on. Well, we at Mirador went, so we feel quite justified in saying, get your finger out, government. There are lots of things to look at, and perhaps this is one of them. Perhaps feathering the nest of friends and family is not the way to go forward. Not perhaps, it's not the way to go forward. How guilty is this government? Well, we'll leave that up to you to decide. The Daily Mail it takes a slightly different view, although it's the same thing, an attack on the government, because it says a top MP earns a fortune for working in a tax haven. And it says that throughout COVID, one MP has happily stayed abroad and earning a fortune working from a tax haven. Let's see if I can get any more detail. I can't at the moment, but I will. I'll go back to that story because it's not fair to give it a headline like that without giving the details. So we'll go back to that story. The Daily Telegraph. 11,600 caught COVID in hospital and died. So that's its lead into whether staff should have the jab or not. It's pointing out that there were a number of people that went in for a sore throat and never came out because they caught COVID while they were in hospital. The Financial Times is central bankers pose a rates puzzle with divergent stance on inflation. Now, inflation is a word that the modern generation are having to come to grips with because we haven't had it for a decade. Everything has been relatively static, which is quite remarkable in itself. But Now inflation has raised its ugly head again, and you can see that already in the supermarket shelves. Things that cost, in fact, actually, if anything, the food industry is stoking inflation to a great rate of knots. Something that was £1 yesterday is £1.50 today, and that's a tremendous jump of 50%. Yeah, it's a jump of 50%. And inflation is nudging 5%. But that means that overall, and inflation is normally taken on a basket of goods, as they call it. In other words, they price things in the marketplace and then come up with an average. So it's 5% inflation and the cost of living. And that's going to hit everybody in the pocket if things cost more, and they do cost more. So inflation is a problem. What the Financial Times is saying is that the usual way to cap inflation is to raise interest rates. So what you do is you make money more expensive to borrow. It stops people spending and lending at a rate, and it starts to reduce inflation. That's the market theory, and in fact, it is the market practice. And what it's saying is that the American banks and the British banks have both decided not to raise interest rates at the moment, and the central bankers in Europe are looking at it in a totally different way, and whether in fact they are ready to raise rates right now is not absolutely clear from the headline, but that they are thinking differently to the banks in the rest of the world. So that's going to create a bit of a problem all the way around globally. And you say, why would that bother me? Well, because what the decisions that these people make, that the central banks make, reflects down eventually to what you pay at the supermarket, to what you pay for a packet of fags. Not that many people buy fags anymore, I don't think. But if you like, the price of ice cream, it is all reflected in the decisions that are made about inflation, about how to handle it, and also, and I suppose, really the cost of money, because the cost of money will mean that your credit card and your credit references will actually suddenly the interest rates will increase. The Daily Star, just want to buy a bag of cheesy Wotsits, and what they're pointing out, my dear Daily Star, is that on eBay at the moment, some people are asking for £8 for a bag of Smith's crisps, or whoever makes the things now. It was Smith's in my day, and that's outrageous because there is a shortage. And actually, I did actually notice as I walked by the little cafe in the bus station yesterday, and I thought it was just the cost of living, but they were asking for crisps at £1. So if you're paying £1 for crisps, then it's not only a shortage, but it's sure a jump in inflation, isn't it? So let's see what Mickey is saying now. Right. Right. He's saying that if the economy crashes, the whole world will be on a basic, universal basic income. In other words, if the economy goes whoosh, then all of us won't have the money to spend. That we'll be living on a basic level. Not sure I agree with you there, Mickey, but nonetheless, it's a good thought. Right. So if you want to buy a packet of crisps, you either buy it now for profit, put it on eBay at £8, or you throw away the oysters and you treat it as luxury goods. The Sun, which is fighting back at the Star for its front pages, is Strop Cat, and its main story is that the Petey and his dancing partner, Katya, I think, were dumped from Strictly on Sunday night. Well, you don't just get dumped anymore. It's got to be a massive issue by the losers. And apparently, Petey, the male part of the operation is saying it's a fix, or his mum is saying it's a fix, is that they were the judges were bought off, or there was something behind the scenes that made them lose. I don't know what Kipling would have made of all of this. Play up, and play the game. And if you lose, you lose, and you go back and you try and win next time. But not anymore. What you do is, as the son says, you get stroppy. There is. Let's go back to that story. The Daily Express to apologise for attempting to change the rules on MPs' disciplinary processes. No, that wasn't the one. The one that we really wanted to look at was Geoffrey Cox voted remotely in Parliament during lockdown after working in the Caribbean. So it's Geoffrey Cox, whose name pops up from time to time as being a bit of a rebel MP. He was sitting in the Caribbean and carrying out his duties as an MP, basking in the sun, sipping sangria or whatever they drink in the Caribbean. I suppose it's rum in the Caribbean, isn't it? And if you've ever been to a Trader Vic's, which doesn't exist anymore, I understand, but in my day, Trader Vic's were the big rum cocktail bars. They were built in mock longhouses from not the Caribbean, but from the Pacific Islanders, and their drinks were absolutely exotic, made of fruit juices and various rums. And you got things called a wahine, and what was the one that I particularly liked? It had a gardenia floating in the middle, and you had 4 straws for this thing, and the idea was that in a party of 4, if you all try to get more than your share, a good way to get a bit squiffy, to say the least. And there were other drinks with a pearl floating on top, but also they all had layers of rum and fruit juice mixes. I wish I could remember the name of that particular drink. But the strange thing is that if you could buy it individually, but if you bought the big one with the 4 straws, is the dish or it was a clay baked dish that you got it in, and at each of the 4 corners was a fertility symbol. So actually, sort of sipping. Drawing in a nice rum drink, watching the gardenia go down and wondering whether you got more than your fellow drinkers, and looking at a fertility symbol is were all the things that I suppose you're supposed to do on a happy date. Not sure that it increased anything, but nonetheless, it was a load of fun. And because I lost track. I mean, in my days in Vancouver, there was a wonderful one in Vancouver, and I lost track of those particular cocktail bars, if you like. I hadn't realised that they had gone out of both fashion and that the chain had closed down. And what a pity! I just hope that somebody somewhere will have the same initiative, because they were absolutely superb places to go to, absolutely superb and so much fun. Right. Let's go back to Geoffrey Cox. Is it right that an MP should be able to sit in the Caribbean during lockdown? It doesn't give that many details, so I think we've got to be very careful what we say about Geoffrey. But essentially, I think the story is that he wasn't in this country for much of lockdown, but he was carrying out his duties and collecting his pay and his subsidies and his benefits and all the rest of it. And the paper is saying, is that right? And this is the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail often has a go at Boris, but it doesn't necessarily reflect anti-government feelings. So if the Mail has decided to say, okay, look, there's a lot of sleaze here, and here's a good example, then it just shows you just how serious the situation is and the feeling is towards Boris, and the fact that he alone seemed responsible for deciding to try and defend the MP who had been a miscreant and who is now no longer even an MP, and the feeling of what was right and proper. And sometimes, if you get that sort of, quote, arrogance, then it starts to feel particularly like authoritarian rule. And having lived in many, many countries with authoritarian rule, as I know just how dangerous that can be. So perhaps everybody is right to think that they have to be very careful indeed. Now let's just, because it's 6:37, 8:37, right, 8:37, and a reminder that it's not going to be a bad day today, although the cloud has thickened in just the time that we've been on the air. The breeze hasn't increased. The trees are still absolutely static. So the breeze is gentle and is likely to remain gentle. The skies are now clouding over, so it is not scattered anymore. But the chance of rain very slim, very slim. I think it raises to about 10% or 12% chance of rain during the next hour, from 8 o'clock until 9:30 or 10. And after that, the chances diminish. So we hope that you're going to have a reasonable day. And yesterday, it didn't seem that chilly, even though the temperature was only about 14. It's going to reach about that today. In fact, it's going to be a little bit warmer, if anything, today than it was yesterday. And undoubtedly, those of you who are already outside can feel that and decide how it is. Right, I'm not going to go the full hour this morning, the full 2 hours, well, the full hour, because my co-host is standing by to come on next Tuesday, Fergus Woods. We'll look forward to Fergus, so that you can hear various people having their say. Mickey Connors is there. And he says, you can Google the basic universal income or universal basic income. It's been on trial in Wales since March, April. Anything I tell you is already doing the research on. People are already researching it. So if you want to know more about the what Mickey calls the universal basic income, which he says we'll all be on if the economies go crash, I think, in fairness, Mickey, that the economies aren't ready to crash just yet. But I take the point that people have felt very comfortable in the past, both in the United States and here, and for that matter in Germany, before the Second World War. When in between the wars, the economies of the major countries did crash, and that there are this competition from China and Russia now, striving to become major economies and become major players, and they obviously are going to look after their own people. So there we go. It's 8:40. I would hope that tomorrow Stuart Dolby will be with me again. Stuart is great fun to have on because he's got a very wicked sense of humour, and since he knows the Johnson family, he has a little pop at them from time to time with stuff that we would never ever know. And then later in the week we have other guests, and by the time that we roll around to next week, we'll have 5 guests on tap, and all our systems will be working, and hopefully we can have a bit of fun at this hour of the morning. Just a little mention locally is one of the great fears was that there was a rise in crime during lockdown, and that this will be reflected once it was locked up. In other words, when we are out of lockdown, and that seems to be the case. There was a stabbing in Hastings. There has been naughty things happening with gangs beating up on youngsters, and an increasing number of young ladies being attacked or assaulted in various walks, right from Chichester across to Hastings. So if that is a trend it's one that we would urge the police to deal with now before it gets out of hand. If you get away with a crime, it encourages others to try the same thing. And that's, I suppose, in the States was called a few years ago zero tolerance. And a lot of liberal people, and when I say liberal, I'm not talking about politically, just their liberal thoughts said, tut, we've got to try to understand these people. Well, perhaps we have. But in the interim, let's make sure that young ladies can walk safely on our streets and that we are not, any of us, afraid of either being attacked in the open or having our homes abused by burglary or any other so-called minor crime. It is time to get a grip. And I would urge you to think about what I've just said. And if you don't like what I've said, let me know. Let me know. Get in touch with us at Mirador Television, because open debate is exactly what we need in this country, and particularly in this area. Open debate on a good many issues that have stayed hidden for more time than really we should appreciate or give it to foster. There are things such as our approach to mental health, our approach to the homeless, our approach to the elderly. A lot of it goes underground because none of us, despite the fact that we'll all give mouth to it, don't really think it's worth bothering about. Everybody's okay. Until we hit a crisis like COVID, and suddenly the crisis appears. It was always there, but then it becomes obvious. So let's not take our foot off the accelerator in looking at these things and calling for reform. And reform has got to start at the bottom. It's got to start with our key councils. They are the people who can influence, and that's why we elect them. At least I think that's why we elect them. And if in fact they strut around coming up with strange ideas which will never work, that does nobody any good. Okay, my hat is up for sale. Somebody on Bonfire Night offered $5,000 for it. Harrison Ford got $125,000 for his. Mine is worth $125,000 plus one. If you've got that sort of money to buy my hat, it may be yours. Till tomorrow, and hopefully with Stuart Dolby, let's say toodle pip for this morning. It is 8:44, 8:45, time for us all to start thinking about getting cracking for the day and facing those issues which are unfortunately part of our life, particularly as we come out of lockdown, and particularly as in many ways, despite the buoyancy of the economy so far, is being a struggle to a lot of us, and that struggle needs to be recognized by the authorities and some relief given instead of what I call the bullying nature of the civil service. I know a couple of my ambassador friends will get very upset when I say that, but nonetheless, that's the way I see it. Until tomorrow, thank you for being with me. Those few people who are, but thank you for those people who will watch throughout the day. And we are grateful that you do. And perhaps what we do is we start a little bit of a debate in your kitchen, in your pub, in your living room, over the garden fence. Let's hope that I say things that are so outrageous that you can't help but talk to your neighbor who you haven't spoken to for years. Right. Okay. Toodle pip. Ta-ra.